That's not okay. Good.
So, I don't know.
So
you're all set.
minimize that.
Yep.
So.
Your actual.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's post. It's okay. Good.
No, you got. Change the settings on it here, but it's not. I know, it's doing it as a second screen instead.
Well, that's good to know, because you used to stuff it doesn't stay this. So anyway.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Now, I
Let's go back and
think you
forth.
still need to, are you gonna share the screen in Zoom or are you just gonna let it?
Yeah, we're gonna share the screen in Zoom.
Okay.
Oh, I still do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you might wanna.
How do I do
But yeah. Yeah, this is good with the mom. Like you get.
Yeah.
I'm
thinking, sure, nobody is.
Oh, here we go. Share.
How's it going? Yeah. Steve, so.
Yeah.
Christine says she was reaching out to you. She wanted me to record.
I'm sorry, what?
Christine had reached out.
Yeah.
She said she wanted me to record.
We're already
Audio.
recording.
Oh, you
We're
are?
recording as we speak.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Then should be sharing. Just to keep it out of the screen's way.
Okay. Oh, you are screen sharing. Good.
Okay.
Now, will they see the speaker too?
I think I did it differently. You can change that. And then it'll just show everything, because then. Well, I don't know, because you're gonna minimize the owl, so it's gonna show. How it's probably just gonna show mostly that,
Okay.
and then it'll hear you, oh, I guess he didn't wanna.
Okay, that's fine.
Then. And then you can.
Okay.
However you wanna do that.
Well, as long as they can see the speaker online, that's the important thing.
It should be.
So she just told me that Megan is on.
Oh, I just heard that. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yes. So, yeah, there is a sound and keep us up there. So that's the thought, that's the.
Yeah, do the first pass and all the
Yeah, it's. One is. The other one is. I gotta get it wrong. Yeah. But it's like music. Something to do with the background. I'll transition it. He seems to. Well, that's. Seems to be opportunity out there.
My niece graduated from the University
Not a
of
good thing.
Cal, and she did it in times insurance. All like, so this is also the PBR, there's a lot of information, online questions.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Now it's fine. You got the attention.
And she works for. And. Reporting. Referral about the sclerosis.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Or it's like there are so many issues.
Wow.
Even in my country, which is medical science, we have almost 2 dozen ambassadors for event periodic, and so like, this is how we do things. They want to provide some feedback and they post all these amazing, information about the product. There's like kind of bias from
Yeah.
Yeah. Whole different line.
Right.
It's a really great opportunity.
Yeah.
Because she likes salvation, she's out there, she's working
Oh,
with
good.
this.
Good.
After she graduated, she said.
This is something for me, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can do it all.
Yeah, my niece had our.
They give us a heads up.
It's really solid.
Yeah, I didn't wanna, it's not which slides you wanna do. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's just the three of us, yeah.
Yes, okay, so you'll be first name, and the first pass, yes.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Brian Glennon, Chair of the Select Board, but I'm also more importantly a member of the MBTA Communities Working Group. With me tonight is Ted Carpenter, Vice Chair, and Steve Gant, the Chair. We'll be presenting to you tonight the town's plan for compliance with the MBTA Communities Law, and we encourage your questions along the way. So next slide, please. Tonight we'll be talking about a number of things. What is the MBTA Communities Act? I'm sure a lot of us know already, but we'll just do that again. How it affects Duxbury, a little bit about our group. Then we'll move on to feedback we received from town meeting in November. It's pretty clear. We're going to talk a little bit about a lawsuit we have currently pending. The town has sued the state, trying to get out of this entirely. We're going to be talking about preparing a proposition for compliance. Proposition for compliance is basically the proposal that our group put together in an effort to comply with the technicalities of the law without, you hear about it, without allowing lots of development. Finally, finally, we'll talk about the compliance strategy and opportunities for public outreach. All right, next slide, please. So the Communities Act, I think we've all heard about it, but basically it's all of Eastern Massachusetts with the exception of the Cape and Islands, 177 communities. The reason that Duxbury is an MBTA community is twofold. One is because the state law enacting it said we are, specifically lists the communities, Duxbury is among them. And more importantly, it's because we're adjacent to Kingston, which has commuter rail stop. All communities in Massachusetts that have commuter rail or rapid transit or next to one of those towns are subject to law. That's why we're in this to begin with. Originally, the law that started the MBTA Communities Initiative was intended to increase housing. I think you'll hear a lot of people talk about need for housing on the South Shore, need for housing in Massachusetts generally. This was started as an opportunity, as it was described to us, to increase housing. Obviously, it's a square peg in a round hole. But it was intended to fix a problem, and the compromise such that it was, the state was pushing down this requirement that said, don't worry, towns, you're gonna be able to figure out where it goes. We're not gonna tell you where to put it. And that's why we exist, is trying to figure out where to put this. And then most importantly, this law does not require the town of Duxbury to do anything other than designate an area in town or areas in town. It doesn't require us to build anything, doesn't require us to finance anything, doesn't require us to do anything other than zoning. And zoning, simply stated, is a set of rules for a particular part of particular parcels of property. Next slide. All right, so the MBTA Communities Working Group, we are not, there's no advocate for this law. Typically at town meeting, there's a proponent of the town meeting warrant article. There's no proponent of this article. The state said you have to do it, take it to town meeting. So the select board decided to put together a working group to say, all right, well, we gotta deal with this. Let's designate 7 citizens in town to try to work on it. And that's the 7 of us. There's 4 other members who aren't here this evening. Excuse me?
Who are they?
Sure, so the 3 of us, then we have Allison Shane. We have, who else on the committee? You've got,
Phil
Phil Thorne.
Alicia Babcock,
Thank you. And who am I forgetting?
and then Megan, who,
Oh, Megan, yeah, Megan Driscoll, who just resigned actually from the committee.
26.
So we have 6 now, that's right. All right, and then we meet every Thursday. So we'll be meeting again Thursday. The meetings have been open to the public. We've been meeting every Thursday since,
February.
yeah, January, February. A lot of work has gone into this. I know there's still opinions on either side, which we welcome that tonight. We still want to hear everybody's opinion. This is a group effort. The town is not pushing anything. We're offering a solution to say, if we have to comply, in other words, if we don't get the relief we want from the court, and we have to do something at town meeting, here's what we think is gonna have the least possible impact on the town, but comply with the requirements of the law. Tag or Steve, you guys wanna take it from here?
Sure.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Ted Carpenter. I'm a member of the planning board and vice chair of the working group. And again, thank you for coming out. Really appreciate you being here today and your patience to sit through all this. We'll get some pretty good discussion, I think, in a few minutes. And as Brian mentioned, if you have questions, you can feel free to jump in, but it does kind of progress, so we might just say, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So, how does this law impact Duxbury? 2021 was passed, and then over a couple of years, they passed guidance, and in the guidance, they got to the specifics of requiring 50 acres for the town of Duxbury due to our classification as an adjacent community. And the key point here is that the law extends property rights. It grants to the owners within the zone additional development rights to do multifamily development up to a certain density. And-
Can you explain that, please?
Sure, well, zoning is a land use regulation, right? The state law is kind of the platform that the zoning sits on, but then our zoning in our town determines how we manage the land within our town. And our standard here in Duxbury is single acre zoning, one home. There are places in town that have parcels as small as a tenth of an acre, for historical reasons. So zoning is like it's a constraint, it's a limit on what can be done on the land. And so by the state passing a general law that says within a half mile of a T station, you're gonna find zoning to grant multifamily, high density development, that obviously expands the production capacity of the land to produce housing. You can get a lot more than one family on 1 acre.
Mile from a T station.
That's what was in the original Mass General law.
Where in Duxbury are we half mile from a T?
We are not, that's because in the law, the actual sentence established 4 criteria. 15 units per acre, multifamily, district of reasonable size, and a half mile OT station. Those were the 4 criteria, but then at the end of the sentence, it says, comma, if applicable. And that if applicable, granted the executive branch, the bureaucracy, the freedom to interpret that law as they saw fit, and that's what they've done. And they've chosen to relax the half mile constraint, but they did not choose to relax the 15 unit per acre density. Because they want high density development to produce more housing more quickly. That's the public goal, is to produce more housing more quickly.
Is this what Duxbury wanted?
This is, we're speaking of the Mass General Law right now. Let's just go through the
I understand.
impacts. And we'll continue.
So could you say this is what the state is asking us to do?
The original policy proposal was half mile of a T
Half mile.
station. And then the executive, House Livable Communities, Housing and Livable Communities Office interpreted that regulation to create the guidance that we're working with here. And through that guidance, we're required to pass a zoning amendment through town meeting at this point by mid-July. This deadline was extended from last December to mid-July. Or face consequences. And we've scheduled in the town of Duxbury a special town meeting for June 16th. So about a month ahead of the deadline. And if the town chooses to pass the zoning.
I just want,
Yeah.
I know you're trying to get through this, and I do appreciate it, because I know you're a volunteer.
Yeah.
But we already voted on it.
We voted on one proposition. And now we have another
So
proposition.
I'm confused, so why are we back here again?
Yes.
I can answer that.
Thank you.
So in November, you may recall, not Marshfield, Milton was suing the state to try to challenge the law in the first place.
Yeah.
That case was pending, and it was our understanding at the time back in the fall that municipalities had an opportunity to choose, to say, yes, we want to comply, and we want the grants, or no, we don't want to comply, and we know we're gonna forego 4 specific grants, and we're okay with that. What happened in December,
What's the total of those 4 grants?
that-
And what are those grants?
Well, let me answer one question before we go to the next one. So then the Supreme Judicial Court, the state's highest court, made a decision in that Milton case and said, no, compliance is not optional. The towns have to comply. So what happened was, the state went back and said, we're gonna rewrite our regulations, because that was, I don't wanna go into the details, it's messy, but the state went back, made some changes to the regulations and said, okay, here are the new regulations, towns, you heard, the Supreme Court said you must comply now, go back and comply. And that's why we're back here now, is because the Supreme Court said we need to be.
But it doesn't seem to answer to me, for me anyway. We had almost 800 people who were either full of all those details. They just said no. And so no matter what the state decided to do to reconfigure the law or the
Yeah.
mandate, the town said no. So now we are coming back again. And are you expecting us now to go back and have the town say no again?
No, I'm expecting the town to comply with the law because the Supreme Court said we have to. That's why this group is doing our best to put forth a proposal that the town can accept that's compliant with the
There
law.
is a judge waiting to rule on this. So.
On an injunction, that's right.
Exactly.
But that hasn't happened yet, so
No,
we're
so-
ready, we're ready, with respect. We're taking parallel routes right now. One is we're challenging the applicability of the law to Duxbury. And in the meantime, if we don't get a ruling, or the ruling is no, we're ready to go forward with the town meeting vote.
You are ready to go forward. The group is. I'm not so sure that Duxbury is.
Well, the town meeting, we're going forward, now whether we vote one way or the other, that's up to town meeting.
As if they vote no.
Yeah,
Well, then we're non-compliant with the law, and I don't know what happens after that, we lose our grants.
Will be compliant.
Well, let me tell you, we'll lose our grants, number one, we know
no,
that.
we'll lose four.
There were four, I don't know the amount, but the state has said,
So you use the word grants.
yes,
Lovely. I'm here to ask questions.
okay.
What is the dollar amount?
have-
What are those
I-
grants and what are those
We,
dollar amounts?
Yeah,
We
that's
have that.
all.
We'll-
in the
we'll answer that.
briefing, yeah.
But what, the reason I'm hesitating is because originally there's 4 specific grants. Now the state has made it a lot more than 4. They said every grant that's discretionary is gonna be subject to compliance with this law. That's why we're so concerned about it and want to propose something that's acceptable to the town.
Your group to give us a list of your currently expected grants and the amount of money that Duxbury is supposed to lose in the event, and I feel the town is gonna vote you down again. So that we can balance that.
Sure, the answer is yes, we have them.
Where?
Yes.
Do you have it here to hand to me? Cause that's what you're saying. Vote yes, or we're gonna lose this money. We're saying,
Well,
what are we losing?
I
Yeah,
think a lot of people in the town, frankly,
Mhm.
think that there are a lot of threats being thrown at us. This is gonna happen, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen.
Thank you.
And I think a lot of us are getting very frustrated with the threats when they're never really formalized as to what those threats are in terms of dollars. The other issue is, if we do rezone and you do get those 240 units, we don't know what those units will cost the town year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have no idea. No one's thought about that particular financial risk to the town. So those are things that we'd like to know ahead. If we knew what the future was possibly gonna look like, we might be able to give you an answer that would be reflective of what I think you want us to do.
Not only that, but it does seem that the state keeps changing their mind on language and what their parameters are, so what's gonna prevent them from changing their mind again?
that's exactly why, you know, it's very difficult, in fact, it's impossible. To come up with a number right now that would quantify what the town's non-compliance exposure would be. Particularly with respect to the grants. It was 4 grant categories initially. That's specified right in the text of the law. The EOHLC expanded that, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, they expanded that. In the guidance, what was formerly the guidance, what's now the regulation. They expanded that to 13. So they added another 9 onto that list that would be exposed to, exclusion for non-compliance. What they've done since then, this is August of 2023, so less than 2 years ago. That's when they expanded it to 13. Now, within the past, I don't know when it's been, past 6 months or something like that, they've added 4 more grant categories on. You keep adding the potential exposure that we can have if we're non-compliant. So as they keep adding these grant programs, it just keeps potentially increasing the exposure that we have as a town.
What does it take? Maura Healy is up for re-election in 2 years. What happens if she does not get re-elected? What happens to all of this?
That is well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here.
I know that, but it really isn't, because we have to live with the outcome of that going forward.
Let's talk about that in the context of the presentation, because we've got enough track, like to resume. Again, we're just gonna emphasize in point 3 here that the town is not required to invest in infrastructure, buy land, build anything. It's strictly a zoning amendment. Could you click on the slide? Thank you. As far as feedback from the last town meeting, this is exactly your point. We put a proposition before the town which honored both the spirit and the letter of the law. It contained about 60% of the land was already fully developed, that's the Island Lake parcel. And about 40% of the land in the proposition last November was developable land off of our map. And the town soundly rejected that proposition. The 60-40 proposition that could have produced housing in the short term was rejected. We take that information to heart. I personally agree with that. I think that was a wise decision by the town. Because we are obligated to comply with the law, we must go through the motion of passing the zoning amendment to satisfy the state's demand. That's what we're discussing. The prospect for development is not something that we want to see, certainly not at this density. I have to say, as a planning board member and as a liaison to the Affordable Housing Trust, that we do have a housing problem in the town of Duxbury. There are people who live here now who want to continue to live here, who can't. There are people who would like to move back. Spoken with some of my cohort, folks that want to buy their folks' house or find a place in town, they can't, because there's not enough housing.
It's got money.
Yeah, well, the money goes up because the supply is low. It's a market dynamic. That's the theory. So this proposition that we're gonna be discussing today.
This has nothing to do with homeownership, and this is all.
Well, that's a whole other discussion, but yes, I agree to see that. So the proposition that we're gonna be talking about today, we changed the strategy specifically to avoid the prospect for immediate short-term development of high-density housing on any of this land. So what you'll see, I just want to skip ahead here, Steve, is we'll get to the maps in a minute, but we've zoned it over existing structures. This is what Brian was alluding to earlier. There are legal activities surrounding this. And I think this is something that I really want to emphasize, that, we think of this as it's a Duxbury issue. We want to defend our town, we want to protect its peaceful, nature. But this is really a national issue that the state is trying to apprehend, and Duxbury is reacting to all of that. So there's activity in the legislature that passed the law, there's activity in the executive to enforce the law, and of course, there's activity in the judiciary, challenges to the law. And we heard about the Milton Challenge last year, which tested very specific aspects of the law, and they determined, the Supreme District Court determined that it is enforceable, that it is constitutional. So fundamentally, the judges found the law to be sound. The lawsuit that Duxbury has filed in Plymouth Superior Court is based on the finding of the state auditor that the law was passed incorrectly, that it should have been funded in the year it was enacted, and was not funded at that time. Now, the unfunded mandate finding by the auditor is not a legal finding. It is an administrative observation. But it does indicate that the legislature didn't follow the law correctly, so it gives us, something to argue with. And Brian might be more familiar than I am with the terms, but basically we're saying it's an unfunded mandate. This is being pushed on to Duxbury, we can't afford to do this. We've compiled evidence of all the costs we've incurred, and we're pursuing that. There are other arguments around that, and you really have to watch the arguments to see the subtleties of it. So this lawsuit, if it is successful, the town may be granted a reprieve, an exemption from having to comply with the law, and that could be a temporary exemption or a permanent exemption. We don't know until the ruling comes up. Finally, the other point on this is that the legislature could pass funding to remove the unfunded mandate. At that point, the argument kind of evaporates. So, the town is doing its best to defend our interests, taking the state to court. We'll, fight that battle. As we do that, we are still obligated to comply. And so that's why, as Brian said, it's a parallel track. I know it's hard to sort of think of this town doing two things at once, but that's what we're doing. Moving forward to pursue compliance and moving forward to the judiciary to try and fight back. Next slide. So we talked about the grant programs. We could probably open that up a little bit more if you would like. The grants that are being restricted are things like infrastructure, storm, flooding. The sidewalk project is an active project on Washington Street. As you can see here, the last couple of years, we've received over $2 million. And the town currently has applications for between $1 and $2 million of grant funding for upcoming years. And this is why, if you ask for a concrete, what's the number? We can't give you a straight answer because the number changes. As applications are put in and grants are awarded, the number goes up,
Has your group determined if they build, I heard someone say that there's already a number of them over on currently. So how many do we need to add to the comply?
Well, this question of a quota is very slippery. The guidance established the criteria of 50 acres and 15 units per acre, which is a total of 750 potential units. But that's the key, is potential. The zoning is an upper limit on development.
This
That's
is the
the
number
block.
240. What does the number 240 represent?
This is a calculation done by a constituent. Unfortunately, it's not grounded in reality. That number isn't really very helpful.
How many do we have now that count?
I
How
mean,
many do we have now that count?
there are, I don't know the exact figure.
So, yep, sure, so there are 320 units right now at Island Creek,
We need 750,
I'm sorry,
and they want 750.
so there are 320 at Island Creek, and the number at the village is
174.
174. So it's on the order of that, yeah, that's roughly what.
160.
And again, I don't know why you don't count my 38 units at my apartment complex. I have asked that question a number of times.
What apartment complex is that?
On Route 53, Parkland Village Apartments.
Oh, Parkland Village, yep.
Yeah, it's, I don't, and I've mentioned this at the first go around.
How large is the area that property sits on?
How many acres?
Yeah,
Sure.
it's an important question, do you know how many?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay,
More-
is it less than 5 acres?
No. I don't think it's less than.
You don't think it is? or-
No, it is.
I'm not gonna answer it.
I looked at the property, if you don't mind, my share.
Yeah,
Yeah, the larger site, I think is 2.8 and the smaller site is 1.2 maybe. So total of 5, not quite.
So is that?
And you need a minimum, in order to be included as part of the district that we would be zoning for this purpose. Any sub-district or any portion of this has to be a minimum of 5 acres, so if it's fewer than 5 acres, we could not include the apartment complex that you live in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Okay.
I figured there was I just was curious what the answer was.
That's,
Thank you.
yeah, great.
So just to conclude on this slide, if the town chooses to pass the amendment to the zoning bylaw, what it does is it allows us to maintain control over our zoning. It might sound a little paradoxical. Yes, it is a demand that we're responding to from the state, but it is a town bylaw. It's a bylaw in our books that we administer entirely within the town of Duxbury. Contrast that with the 40B comprehensive permit statute, which was passed in 1969, which takes the permitting cycle essentially out of the town, and it's done by a state agency. So this is yes, this is an argument in favor of passing the zoning to maintain our local control, because if we don't pass the zoning, again, this is a threat. I know nobody wants to hear threats, but we know that it is entirely within the rights of the state to reach in and mandate this themselves, because they have the power of the law behind them. Once the law is changed, that is an eventuality.
Could we just end on this slide when you're ready? But can I just ask you? The 750 that is thrown out there is an option, a place we want to go. The 240 you just said to me, and I've been reading a lot of literature that says 240 all along. First time I've heard that is really not relevant. So are we ending this slide when it's time, not knowing how many units? We just know where they're gonna be, according to you. Is that,
Yeah, because we haven't looked at the map yet, so yes, we will end this
what will the
one.
map show of the number of units?
We can discuss it.
Oh, so you don't have it right now in the presentation, we're gonna discuss it. Is that right?
Let's go ahead and do that. Next slide. So this is the zoning map that we're talking about amending. There are actually 2 of them. And you can see the detail up here will show up on the screen in a moment. We've selected, identified 2 sub-districts for the MBTA Communities Overlay District. And they are the MBTA Communities Overlay District in Kingstown, which is overlaid on the village at Duxbury. And the MBTA Communities Overlay District on Tremont Street, which is overlaid on the park at Island Creek, Heath properties. And in both cases, the properties are fully developed, meaning that there is no available capacity for additional construction in either of these sub-districts. So let's go to the next slide and you can look at the detail. Yeah.
You've spoken to ownership of both of those properties to see if they're, like, are they on board with this? Do they have a say in this?
The town has different connections with each of the parcels, each of the property owners. The working group has been, working to schedule calls. I can't report. I haven't been personally to any of the meetings, but there have been discussions.
So maybe we haven't even talked to ownership to see if
Oh, yeah.
So
you have talked to ownership on both of those properties.
Yeah.
You're saying yes. I am curious about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I spoke to the village myself.
Has anybody who's spoken to Island Creek?
what about the church? They have very developable property and you're saying it's not possible.
Yeah, let's look at
That's
that.
not true.
The working group has been trying to schedule time with the church. I understood that they've been.
I'm asking you.
I know, I'm trying to answer the prior question. You guys are kind of getting ahead of the answers. So let's start with the village at Duxbury. This is, as you see here, Kingstown Way, meets Summer Street. This is a line, ignore all that. And so you see, I don't know if you're familiar with it, they have a long driveway, they have a large apartment building. These dark lines are all built environment. And you can see the parcel outline. This is the overlay district. And this is a subset of the land that is owned by the village. The village also owns this portion up here. That's part of this lot, but as you can see, it is not included in the MBTA community zoning. So the area that's zoned is 20.65 acres. It is already developed at a density of about 12 units per acre, and that's what the zoning provides for. So this site is fully developed. Doesn't present any opportunity for additional housing. Any questions about the village?
Yeah, I see green areas, they can't develop there.
No, well, because of the fact that the volume of housing is already at the density allowed by the amendment. So even though there's green space, they've already got all the housing. If they were wanting to build more housing, they'd have to remove some housing to add housing.
I thought you were raising the density.
Well, it's a little hard to handle because the state mandated a minimum of 15 units per acre, because they'd love to see people zone more. But of course, here in Duxbury, we treated that as a maximum. We don't want to see beyond that. So even though it's stated by the state as a maximum, as a minimum, we treat it as a maximum.
Is that site at 15 units per acre?
This in the amendment is zoned at 12 units per acre.
So it's not.
Yeah.
At the maximum.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it's an average across both districts.
But you're right, it's 12 would be
You're
the
telling me
maximum.
that site, the new zoning would allow that site to go to 15, it's currently at 12, but it can't have yet.
No, the new zoning would allow the site to go to 12.
Okay, explain the average.
Yeah. Well, let me go through Island Creek and then
Right.
the average.
So the new zoning is gonna stop that at 12, where it's at now.
Correct.
Yep, that is the design. Thank you for the question. The park at Island Creek is a larger area, 29.47 acres. And the same approach, as you can see, was taken, drawing the bounds tightly near the existing improvements. And I know everyone's eye goes right to this, there's green here, right? Looks buildable. But in fact, this area is already improved. You see there's parking here, there's parking here, that's development. And that parking is required by the church because of the number of people that attend. So this is not developable land. Further, as I understand it, this small green space here, I've been told is actually the leaching field for the septic. For this site, so they're gonna build anything on the leaching field either. So as far as this zone, it is zoned at a higher number, they average out to 15.
What is that zone? If the other one is 12.
Yeah, this is 12 and this is 19.
Yeah.
The
If
average
that's
enough.
zoned at 19, what is it currently?
The density, depending on where you draw the lines, is
Well, the
around,
line you took wrong.
yeah, it's around 13 the way it's drawn.
So 13 is what it is now,
Mhm.
19 is what our zoning would allow them to do if they found a way. And you're telling me,
Upper
you're
limit.
telling us they won't find a way.
No, I'm not a mind reader, I don't have a crystal ball.
Statements on your
Yeah.
thing. You're saying they're not going to go from 13 to 19,
No,
although your zoning allows it. And,
we,
you know, we all know that's what they're gonna do.
I have to stop you right there. I have to say that, no, we did not say they are not going to develop. We've been very, very careful about
No, you
this.
say no.
It's extremely unlikely. That is what we are saying, is extremely unlikely.
So what?
Based on the fact
I
that
mean, who? You're saying? Where's this coming from?
the,
So Ted, whose opinion? is
Yeah, how
that?
did, you're just standing here telling me it's not gonna go
That's
from
not-
13 to 19, but where's that coming from? I know, there's buildings there and there's roads and there's pavement, so it's very hard. That's not really good enough for people.
well, the analysis would have to include the, as you know how familiar you are, I'm just learning it myself in terms of, the capital return on investment of a building infrastructure investment. This is an investment, so this has a return. They are generating revenue from this today.
So you guys have run the numbers and it's not profitable.
I have not run the numbers. That is
Okay.
not my business.
Okay.
Based on
Some of the buildings and come in with 4 and 5 stories to meet the 19, 20, 25,
Yeah.
to average that out to 15?
no, there is no possibility of 5 stories.
Knock down, yes, they could knock down,
So,
but not 5 stories.
so at this point, they can go building by building by building in 3, 9, 12 months, they can have, what they want in it.
So here's what I want to emphasize, there's a bigger picture here that I think we might be losing sight of here. The objective is that we need to find 50 acres in town that we would be able to zone for this particular purpose. When we voted last September, we had, last November, we had 2 districts, 2, we call them sub-districts. Both of them combined called the district, each of them is called the sub-district. We had 2 sub-districts, one of them looked a lot like what you see on the right, with Island Creek, and the other one was the Bonji's Turkey Farm. Bonji's Turkey Farm is greenfield, essentially. So high probability that something would be developed there. The message that we heard is, we want to minimize, we want 0 development as a result of all of this. We can't promise 0 development. Cannot do that. What we can do, and what we've done here, is we have done what we can to minimize the possibility that there would be new development as a result, if we do adopt this particular zoning map, these maps in the bylaw. This minimizes the possibility that there would be new development. So we can talk about all kinds of possibilities about, well, they can knock buildings down at Island Creek, they could add another story onto some of the buildings, or, what have you, all kinds of different things. But the fact of the matter is, we can't get to an absolute 0 promise of no future development as a result of this particular law. This is truly what we have here, these 2 districts. This is, so we're talking about the possibility, or minimizing the possibility of new development. That's what we're gonna do. Right there, in town. That's what we can do.
So if we vote no again,
Question,
Yes, go ahead.
and thank you for everything that you're doing, it's not an easy process, I get that. So,
We knew what we were signing up for.
so in theory, MBTA communities, they're gonna comply, or we're gonna experience, or they're gonna experience some new definition of green mail, if you will. They're gonna hold back the money because you didn't do what we told you to do. So my question is, if a community like Duxbury was to go forward, are we allowed to determine the eligibility of the occupants? Let me define that. Citizenship, criminal background, veterans, residents who are elderly whose financial position changed. Can we get priority on those 4 or 5 categories before we bring in outsiders, whatever their criteria is to be under the state? Can we define them?
Excellent question. And so the answer is, we're able to define certain parameters of what can go, what can be permitted in terms of occupancy here, if anything new is developed. Under this particular bylaw that we're proposing.
Like
Example,
a 50 and over type system?
So no, the law specifically excludes us from being able to restrict residency at anything that's developed under this particular bylaw. To restrict it to people of a certain age, unfortunately. Trust me, if we could have done that, that's something we absolutely would have done.
So what parameters could you put in?
I'm sorry?
What parameters?
Oh, okay, so what we're able to do is, we are able to, right from the get-go, we can, any new units that would be developed here, again, under this particular bylaw. A minimum of 10% of those units will be required to be affordable. At or below to residents who are earning at or below 80% of area median income.
Can we
So-
keep that to Duxbury residents?
I'm sorry,
Can we keep that to Duxbury residents?
that's another question, I'll get to that in just a second. So at least 10% of any new units that would be built under this would have to be affordable, as I say, to residents at or
How
below
long would that have to
80% of
be?
AMI, excuse me,
How long would they have to be affordable?
what do you mean?
Indefinitely?
They would get, if this is zoning requirement, so as long as the zoning bylaw is in place, they would have to be affordable.
Talk about the local option too,
Okay.
the local option, the local preference.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So does that mean, so yes, so again, as long as the zoning bylaw is in place or unmodified, they would have to be affordable. So
How many
think of it as-
residents per unit?
I'm sorry,
Any limitation on number of residents per unit?
that was part of the problem that we had with the bylaw that we had last November. And you might remember when EOHLC gave us some feedback on the bylaw right before town meeting, remember that? They were concerned about how the town of Duxbury defines the term family. And so we've, so that's an issue that we've resolved in this particular bylaw. But, we can't, as part of the zoning, we can't restrict the number of people who would be living in the unit. However, that would be something that would fall under the purview of the Board of Health with regard to the number of people that would be able to live in these units, so. But going back to the affordability, so 10% of them would have to be affordable. Now, what we've done is we've also built into the bylaw that if we're able to get a feasibility, it's called a feasibility study, and we would have to pay for that. That would show that it would be possible or feasible to develop new units at either one of these locations. To increase the affordability above 10%, we would have the ability to do that up to a maximum of 20%. So a maximum of 20% of the units could possibly be affordable on the terms that I just mentioned. Now, in order for it to go above 10% and anything higher than 10%, we would have to have a feasibility study in order to be able to do that. The reason why we wanted to do it at least 10% is because right now, Duxbury's subsidized housing inventory, or SHI, we're about, changes from day to day really, but we're about 7.5%. So we're about 2.5% away from that 10% threshold that will allow us to avoid 40B developments here in town. If new development here, if there is any new development, and 10% of those units would have to be affordable, that would allow us to at least tread water with the SHI wherever it happens to be at the time they get developed.
I'm sorry, I didn't get to say, but he was talking about a leaching field, so.
Well, can you hold that question for a second, I just wanna close, I wanna make sure we close out on questions before we jump to new ones. So that was, so affordability, and then, you asked about,
Citizenship.
Citizenship, oh, yeah.
Criminal background.
yeah, that's beyond the scope of what we can do within a zoning bylaw, so, but someone also asked about local preference, and that, okay, so that's something that we also built into the bylaw. So that when the units are first being leased up, there will be a lottery, particularly for and this would apply to the affordable units. So there would be a lottery associated with those affordable units, and in that lottery, there would be preference given to people who meet certain criteria. They either currently live in Duxbury, or, I have to go through the bylaw, I can't remember all these.
Firefighters, police
Yeah,
officers.
teacher, municipal employees, would be given preference, and
Are there
that's,
any DEI overlays on this?
there's no such thing, no.
There's no such thing.
No such thing here, no.
Here.
Yeah. So that's affordability, that's local preference. What were some of the other?
Citizenship was a big.
Yeah, again, that's not something that's under the purview of zoning.
Okay.
Veterans.
But yet, that, we're not able to restrict based on veteran status. Trust me, if we could, that is absolutely something we would have considered.
Seniors,
Same thing, we can't do that, we certainly would have considered it. I'm sorry?
handicapped seniors, veterans,
Mhm.
that's what should be getting these apartments in our town.
That, again, we've maximized it to the extent that we can, with the veteran preference.
The leaching field, because if you cannot set a number of people living in each apartment. What is that gonna do to the capacity to deal with all that?
You have to be able to build a sewage treatment plant.
Any new development would be subject to, there would be a requirement that they would have to demonstrate that that the waste that would be generated from any of those new units, that whatever waste treatment system they have now, or whatever they would be required to build, would have to accommodate that. So they would probably need land here or somewhere else. That would be the developer's problem to solve.
I also wanted to say, so you said 750,
Oh, I'm sorry, I just want to be, so 750, that is the absolute minimum that we would have to zone for. Yes, now, what the state required, or they didn't require this, but they recommended us to do was that we should build a buffer into that, a 10% buffer.
Sure.
We said, get lost with your 10% buffer. So we said, we're gonna do a 5% buffer. So we've zoned these two areas, 12 on the left, 19 on the right, with those acreages. It comes out to about 787 units, so that's roughly 5% buffer. And that's because, we can't be, at this moment, we can't be sure that everything that we've done here with the map and the bylaw is gonna comply, because we'll submit this to the, if we pass this, we'll submit the bylaw to the state, we'll submit the maps to the state, they'll review them, they'll fly spec them, and if there's any problems with them, they'll come back to us and say, you have to fix this, this, and this, and then we would have to go back and fix it.
So the two numbers that you gave me, current apartments in both locations was 490. 750 minus 490 is 260, very close to what Evelyn was saying about the 240. Now you're throwing in another 35, so it's 300
Additional.
units.
Well, once again, that's, think of that as an absolute upper ceiling. Yeah, that's an upper
What's
ceiling.
that number, Steve?
Again,
Bill, what's the number that
787.
new zoning would allow
Oh.
Island Creek?
across both of these, 787.
No, how many new ones to Island Creek?
Oh, so I guess, run out the numbers, 29.5 times 19.
No, well, that's the
From the
fallacy of this argument. Unfortunately, I can speak to this because,
I was leading into that thing.
I've been at this since 2021. And this law first came out, and I was concerned that this could impact Duxbury, and well, we're going to T-station, so it's not gonna impact us. Then the guidance came out, and they added this whole category of adjacent communities, and it became very clear that we're gonna have to deal with this. And so I've been doing this exercise. How many acres is it? What's the density? What could you build there? And the problem is that kind of very rough, let's just put a number on logic, it is in denial of reality. You're dealing with reality here. The actual land, the actual buildings, the actual infrastructure. So to focus on, well, the state says 750, and now we went to 787, and that means 300 new. It's a fantasy. It doesn't make sense to think that way, because it's not grounded in the reality of what we're dealing with. You talk to people who actually build homes.
So how many
You deal with this
So
stuff.
how many exist now?
And Island Creek,
At both places. I think I can do a map myself if you're not gonna tell me.
190 at the village.
and 320
You
at,
also said that
109, so
you thought being an adjacent town was.
there's 190 at the village, and how many is there at Island Creek?
320.
340. So that's 510. So
787 minus 510,
So I
200.
minus 780. There's 274 that your new zoning will allow at Island Creek. That was easy.
Right, that's
That was
an
easy.
imaginary absolute upper limit. When you actually do the design and permitting, it doesn't work
It's
out.
hard for them to do it, but the reality is your new zoning. That we're coming out with allows for 270 more at Island Creek.
It confers additional development rights.
Yeah.
It doesn't confer, you get 270, no, that's not how it
It
works.
was a simple question. What's the maximum? And that's all I was asking.
Okay, well, then I'm telling you that the
270.
maximum number is not helpful. It's a distraction.
If you live near there, it's helpful.
Yeah, if you live there, you know what it's like.
Traffic and what's going on there now, and you add 270, it matters. It's helpful.
Yeah.
If you're talking about doubling the size of that place, I'd like to know.
Of course.
The
You
town,
say it's hard and it won't happen immediately. Neither of those things comfort me.
This development took almost 30 years. to reach the stage that it's at. The ownership interest, as I've learned just earlier this week, doesn't align with the buildings. There are overlapping leases that confound any development potential for this property. So again, we're trying to put forward a proposition for the town that we know is gonna present the least possible risk for any kind of major expansion of the
What
house.
Steve said, and I appreciate that, was a very good statement. You created something that made it difficult, but when you say it can't happen,
Well,
then
it's-
I ask that
No
about.
one said it can't happen.
Didn't say
Yeah.
Well, a lot of times you do.
Minimize the
I
cost.
can speak tonight, but a lot of times that statement comes out, they can't build there, it's not possible.
It's unfortunate
It's
people
not
hear that.
feasible, you know, that,
We
let's
have
be
to.
honest.
Now, the other thing to consider here too, and Ted, you're talking about the overlap in leases, and that's absolutely true. The other thing to consider is, those were developed under 40B. 40B,
Those are companies.
yes, it was comprehensive permit, that allowed the developer to bypass a lot of the existing zoning requirements that were there. Anything that would be developed under this particular overlay that we're proposing would have to be developed pursuant to the terms of the bylaw that were, so that was developed to bypass the zoning. Anything that would be developed here would have to comply with that zoning, so that's another, if you will.
Comply with town zoning, or
Comply with the bylaw that we are proposing here.
it has to comply with the new zoning, it doesn't have to comply with previous town zoning.
Well, again, it was developed under a comprehensive permit, so it was developed under the terms of that particular permit.
Right.
That again bypassed the existing zoning requirements, that the base zoning.
But this is gonna bypass existing.
It's not gonna bypass, it's gonna overlay, yeah, go ahead.
Steve, so if I'm understanding this correctly. So your group, or the recommendation is, we can just zone it? You're just gonna submit this to the state, even though everybody knows it's supposedly, it's never gonna get built on. That's what our presentation.
Well, please don't say it's never gonna get built.
Well, whatever, I'm just saying,
It will, you just said it will.
I'm just saying, so that's what you're is that what it is? You want us to propose to zone it, just to zone it?
Hmm.
That's what this is.
Yes. This is a zoning proposition that we're putting before the town.
So why would the state accept it?
Yeah, there's still a short.
Continue.
Stage.
Yeah,
Is that in
okay.
there? Is that part of your
It is, it's in there
presentation?
now.
That's an excellent question, we have an answer.
Sure, it's kind of cut off at the top here, my apologies, why are we proposing, zoning these properties where multifamily housing already exists? Well, the idea is, there are other towns here, on the South Shore that have taken this approach, zoning over, applying an overlay over existing dense development. Braintree and Hingham have both taken this approach. Braintree has submitted their plan, I'm sorry?
They have high-speed train in towns.
Yeah,
We're not the same.
Nobody's just saying.
but we still have, they had to submit a plan to the state, just like we do. They had to submit a plan to the state that had them, they had the zone for a particular number of units. Their requirements were a lot higher than ours, because they're a rapid transit community, so their requirements were a lot higher. But the point is, what they did was they put an overlay on existing dense development, the Grossman's Plaza, right there next to where the convention is. They overlaid that, they might have done something else too, I don't know, but anyway. But, they overlaid an area that's really minimized the possibility of future development, so. The state allowed them to do that, they approved their plan. Hingham has done something very similar, they've overlaid existing dense development in Hingham. They've submitted their plan to the state has not fully, they haven't passed their verdict on it yet. If Braintree is indicative, everything that we've seen here too, from our consultants, they've said this is absolutely something that you can do. That was something that was argued in court as well. The state agreed that what's referred to as paper compliance, we refer to it as minimal compliance, basically the same thing. Being able to overlay existing dense development is permissible under this law, and that's why we're proposing to do it. But the expanded development rights, again, will create very little opportunity there, we've talked about that. It's logistically difficult and expensive to do that. Talked about the village is already at the proposed density, so there's really no opportunity to add anything, net new development there at the village. You've got a cooperative board there at the village, of course, they need to pass a majority vote to do something. And evict residents there, again, things that would add complexity and difficulty to new development. And then the Island Creek wastewater treatment facility is already at or near its capacity, so once again, they would need to expand that, build a new one, do all kinds of different things. Cost, complexity, again, this is something that's going to minimize, not gonna say zero, we're not gonna say zero, we're not gonna say never. But these are factors that are helping to reduce the possibility that there's additional new development here.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead,
I'm not sure that answered that question.
which one?
I don't believe that last slide answered that question and that.
What was it about? What was?
I'll try to rephrase it. What we are led to believe that
I do,
with consultants by you,
keep going.
we are led to believe that consultants from the state, so they come in to help us and they're proposing that we go this paper compliance.
They're not from the state. It's a private organization, it's a nonprofit. It's not, this is not a state organization we're talking about, so let's be very clear about that.
Either way, here we are, we're trying, we're led to believe that paper compliance with very little possibility of housing opportunity, which is what the law intends, is actually what you're recommending. And it's very difficult to accept that. It feels like.
Why is that difficult to accept?
Because I believe that, so there are lots of people here who I recognize and love, who are dedicated to this. And
Dedicated to what?
to, I think, fair opportunity in housing for others, and maybe.
You've got wide agreement here, yeah.
But yet we're being sold this idea, which is paper, not sold, we're being asked to accept paper compliance with very little opportunity for housing.
Right, so why does this
Feel good about that?
I'm sorry?
We're supposed to feel good about that?
Both- both-
not the objection of getting more housing?
Right.
So why would the state
Why we're
say, okay, we're gonna accept this paper?
Especially when the state keeps changing its mind. on
Right.
that.
Yeah, so that's
Well-
why it's like, something's not, it doesn't make sense.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
You know, I can't presume to plumb the mind of the state on all this stuff. But think about this, but here's how I have one.
That goes to it. I cannot vote for something that I don't understand. So that's where I'm like, I love the idea of housing and, you know, having more. I'm in the business of doing that, right?
Mhm.
So, but this doesn't, I can't support something, yay or nay, if I don't understand it.
Well, so, but getting back to the question of, you know, something doesn't seem quite right there. Let's remember, this is a law that affects 177 communities, just about half the entire state in terms of the number of municipalities in the state. Huge aspects of the law are one size fits all. They couldn't tailor, realistically, they couldn't tailor the law or even the guidance, now the regulations, to the individual needs, desires, physical characteristics of the municipalities that would be subject to this law.
Then
So
they
they-
should respect the town's vote.
Well, I'll come back to that. So this is how I'm thinking about it. So they had to pass this law with these broad requirements in it, 15 units per acre. District of reasonable size depending on the individual municipality. It's something that's look at the town of Princeton. The town of Princeton is one big block of granite. And they're subject to this. There's no way they can build 750 units, I don't know what their requirement is, but the number of units they're required, but there's no way they could do that. But the law didn't take account of that. The law doesn't take account of the specifics that we have here in Duxbury either. So as a result, since they can't account for all of that, the reality is they can't reasonably exclude a town like Duxbury from putting this overlay on areas where development already exists, because some towns and some cities that would be affected by this don't have 50 acres where nothing exists. So in a sense, what you do, you would have to overlay some area that has some level of development on it already. Well, now, if what you're doing is you're restricting or you're allowing people to put the overlay on areas that are developed in some way, well, how in the world is the law or a regulation gonna distinguish between an area that has 5 houses on it, 7 houses on it, 320 homes on it. How are you gonna, realistically, they couldn't do that. So that is the reason really why the law would allow us to put this overlay on existing development like we're doing here. Does that make sense?
Steve?
Yeah.
None of this makes sense to me.
Well, you know,
I understand your answer. I know there was the question over here.
yes,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
My question is,
well, you've had several, but we'll come back to it. If you got a question, we'll come back.
I just have a quick question. So you said that the state would do the age restriction. So if the village of Duxbury wants to then.
Wait, the state would do what?
With the bylaws, as the bylaws, you couldn't have an age.
We can't have it, yes.
So if the village of Duxbury wanted to then expand their extra, however, I've heard 2 different numbers, 190, 174, up to the 240.
Mhm.
Can they do it, an age restriction? Or are they gonna be putting kids in with the elderly?
Well, I mean, if they wanted to if they wanted to voluntarily age restrict it, they would be able to do that. We cannot require that it be developed with an age restriction.
Who is they, the owners?
They, the owners or the developer, yeah. Does that make sense? Okay, okay.
my question is, you talked about, I'm trying to think of the other version of this.
What are the,
There are other,
The
there
one
are
I
other
lost.
towns, there are
Oh.
other towns who are involved with the legal aspects of this, of just not wanting to go through this process, and they're trying to avoid it in any way we can legally. So how can you speak to what those legal entities are saying to help those of us who don't believe that this should happen? Can you talk about the other side of it? Because you're talking about the positive sides of it. I got it. How do we get around this? But can you switch the conversation a bit to the risks and why we shouldn't? Because you are a working group.
Mhm.
You are not an advocacy group for this. You are a working group. Both sides have to be represented. And I don't think the other side has been fully represented to talk to the people who said no. Help us understand from our perspective, why?
what, why we're doing this?
No,
You're just promoting, it. You're not really
right.
talking about.
Stop promoting it and stop telling us about how we could avoid it.
Mhm. Well, I think as Brian mentioned early on, and Ted mentioned it too. We've got 2 parallel tracks here. We've got the compliance proposition that we're talking about here. Then the town has also, filed the lawsuit, and
I'd like to hear more about it. I think for those of us who voted no,
Mhm.
we would like to know more about how that part of the situation is being actually processed. And
Well,
what your feelings are about that.
well, I mean, my feelings don't matter.
Well, I think they do because you had this group,
Yeah,
and I'm assuming this group is balanced.
we have a wide range of opinions on all these things, but to your question about the legal, I'm not an attorney. Right, you can do this better than I can. But so get the hook, Brian's got the hook, he'll pull me off if I'm going straight. So the lawsuit that we filed, there were really two what are called 2 counts. As part of the bylaw, Tad touched on them earlier, or in particular on one of them. The first was the unfunded mandate question. That was what the state auditor's office came out with back in, whatever it was, January, or whatever, it was January. Said, it's our opinion, this is the opinion of a regulatory body. They said this is an unfunded mandate. And so the town of Duxbury, in our lawsuit, we said, yeah, we also think this is an unfunded mandate, and we would like to be exempted from having to comply with the law as a result of that particular situation. So that's why, that was one of the 2 counts that we had in our lawsuit. As Ted mentioned, that's an unfunded mandate. Now, what could happen there is that, say we're successful, and then the court says, yes, this is an unfunded mandate, and as a result of that, you're not required to comply with the law until such time as the mandate would be funded. So then, as Ted did mention, the state could come along and the state could say, okay, well, we're gonna, allocate money, we're gonna, resource money, we're gonna provide you with the money, Duxbury and other towns. Then it takes, however the court would define it, to fund the unfunded mandate. And once they would do that, then, as Ted mentioned, that argument would just kind of dissipate and we would be back in a non-compliant status if we hadn't passed it. So that's the first aspect of that. The second aspect, potentially has more teeth. So that was the second count. And the second count, was one that challenges the validity of the regulations. The regulations are those are formerly the guidance, now there's the regulations. That's what's putting the teeth, if you will, into why Duxbury has to do anything at all. But we have, as part of our lawsuit, and other towns are doing this too, we have questioned and we've requested an exemption from complying with the law because we're questioning and we're challenging the validity of those regulations. Now, that's with the court right now. We don't know how that's all gonna come out. I think June 8th is a date that the court has indicated that they would issue some kind of an opinion. Are they held to the June 8th date? I suppose they could do it earlier, they could do it later, I don't know, and we have no idea what that's gonna look like. But that's the nature of the, did I get that right?
That's right.
Okay, so that's, if you will, those are the key features. There's a lot more to it. Brian sent me 78 pages of text from the arguments. I haven't gone through them yet, but I will. But that's the Cliff Note version of the lawsuit that Duxbury has right now.
Have you ever gone to a casino and gambled and thrown the pieces out there for craps? What would be the percentage, do you think,
Oh,
of
holy
us
smokes.
actually having to build anything?
I
Well, that's it.
can't predict what I'm gonna have for dinner.
Steve, let me
So,
just
I
ask
can't
that.
answer that question.
The requirement for the town to build is 0. The town is not required to build anything. We just have to zone.
But we are supposed to pay for something once it's built.
We are.
There was something,
Yeah.
something.
Town.
We just Yeah,
Well, yes,
I
yes.
think
It's
that's.
not in
part of
connection
it.
with the development, but yes, like any other
Right.
development, you have the costs that go along with funding residential.
But we don't
requirements.
have to, we can't even get full staff for police and fire, and we can only water on Thursdays. We have, water bills triple, so how do you rationalize, I mean, that's my, how do you rationalize? How does this happen?
I mean, because we talk about affordability, give you, want to have 2 police, 2 fire,
How do we get all these other
gonna go
people?
off. I know that's a little off topic from this, but down the road, it's gonna come into play, I mean, it's.
The big gap.
Well, high density housing, it's gonna add to the strain of police, fire, water, schools, and so. Is there any looking into a budget for those things? I mean, we can't afford 2 police and fire right now, or teachers, so.
What's the
Without
cost
any-
benefit analysis to the income, the tax income that will happen with this versus what we're gonna outlay?
Versus the grants we're gonna lose.
Yeah,
We're
that's,
gonna lose more building new schools than we're gonna lose with grants.
So, looking at school enrollment, I think, if you've looked at it, over the past 10 years or so,
It's declining.
the enrollment's going down.
Yeah, but they want more money, still the same.
Well, I mean, once again, we're getting beyond the purview here, but the idea, right, if we're talking about, this potentially putting a strain on the school system. We've had hundreds of more students in the school system as recently as 10 years ago, number one. Number two, so and we're only talking, a couple hundred units here, number one. Number two, when you look at studies well, hold on. When you, let me finish. When you look at studies that look at the types of residents that you would have, sometimes horrible, but the profile of the residents that you would have in these units, they tend not to have a lot of children who would be moving into these multi-family units. So would there be children moving into them? I think it's fair to say that it's possible that there would be, but if we're talking about a huge strain on the school system, I don't think that's a realistic proposition.
Steve, I have one important point.
Sure, go ahead.
The state has no money.
Yeah,
The state itself has no money.
today.
There you go.
So, so there's a
The
good point.
state has no money. We're paying
Give those
for
grants.
those,
Yeah.
we don't have any money. They're trying to do the budget. They're billions of dollars in deficit. So yeah, they're gonna look for any reason to take money back from the town, whether it's MBTA, Brian, whether it's MBTA Communities Act or whatever it is. The state has no money.
Yes, and what else are we doing? Again, going back to our lawsuit. Our lawsuit is arguing that this is an unfunded mandate. Well, if the state is gonna fund the unfunded mandate and they don't have any money, that works in a sense works in our favor.
Money or illegal sleepover in Kingston and the Ely hotels. And they do find money for certain things that they want. It's kind of interesting. And I don't trust anything that comes out of the state because I also remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
So,
I
once again,
haven't forgotten, Steve.
I wouldn't expect you to, so, once again, we're reaching a little bit beyond kind of purview what we're talking
But it's all-
about.
I think
Well,
All the.
So, yeah, go ahead.
say that we stand to lose $1 billion or $2 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we don't do this, well,
Yeah.
if we choose to do this and not lose that 2 billion, this is very relevant that all these other expenses come in and negate the $2 billion or the $1 billion. So you brought up the fact that let's do this because we might lose $1 billion. Well, that makes the counter argument, it's gonna cost us $2 million to do it.
And once again, the other thing to remember here is, you know, the way that you might remember going back to, this is before January of this year, when the town of Milton had before the SJC ruled. The town of Milton came out and, one of the arguments among the folks in Milton who opposed, but we have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, it's so fine, it just reminded me of it. The people who were opposed to it in Milton, they said, well, you know what? We're gonna lose grants as a result of this. That's fine, that's the cost of saying no, so if that's what we have to do, then we're just gonna take that and we're not gonna get our grants.
There you go.
Well, that's not the reality though. You lose the grants, and again, Tag alluded to this earlier, it was on one of the slides. The law is still the law is now constitutional, or the SJC has said so, constitutional, and it's enforceable.
So
So
they
not only,
they take labor
not,
from us?
not only could we lose the grants, but then the state could also take additional enforcement actions. So, once again, Brian, well, here's a hook here, if I'm going on, so, but here's the thing. So if we were then non-compliant, you know, if we vote no, and we're non-compliant again, and then we go past our deadline, again, we're not compliant. What the state could do is, they could then take steps to force us to comply with the law.
Like what?
They could file suit against the town of Duxbury.
that's not about getting options.
We understand that, but we would have had the chance to vote, and then, you know, we said no twice. Then the state could do this, they could sue the town to force us to comply. And then if we continue to refuse to comply, there's the possibility, again, we're speculating here. There's the possibility that we could be found in contempt of court if we continue to not comply. And then there's all kinds of consequences for the companies.
I'll take it. I'll take it for the town.
Sure, right. So I just want to finish up, I'll come right back to you. So, you know, so when we're talking about the grants, yes, the grant exposure is there. That's just one part of the picture. It could get a whole lot worse, depending on what the state and how aggressively the state wants to enforce the law, if we're not compliant. That's the other thing to consider. And we have no idea what the state will or would do in a situation like that.
Doesn't this feel like communism to you? It's just the same, I mean, I know.
Well, so-
Like, you must do this, you must, like father government, you must. It's just like, it's really hard to swallow.
The seed of the American
Revolution,
250 years ago,
We're not talking about anything we're talking about anything that we've chosen to do here. This is,
You've chosen it,
yeah,
but I'm gonna throw tea into the bed. I'm gonna have tea. Because I don't understand this, and I don't understand in the cradle of the revolution where, you know, I don't understand how Massachusetts is just going with this. I don't, it's against everything that this country was founded on. It really doesn't make any sense, and I know, and I'm not expecting you to say, I'm just saying how I feel.
I understand that, and I've expressed this before, and I'll take it. Do you believe me that I will come back to you? I will come back to you in just a second. You know, when I look at this whole thing, and again, I've said this before, you know, whose fault is this? It's my fault. This is my fault. You know, was I paying attention when the state was debating? No, I wasn't paying attention. Was I calling up Josh Cutler when all this was going on and telling Josh, no, you shouldn't vote on this? I don't call this. No, I wasn't paying attention. This is my fault. Why this happened? So I will tell you, I'm not gonna let this happen again. not on my watch, not without me yelling. Anyway, so I will off my soapbox. Yes, please give me a question.
Two questions. So my first one is regarding the lawsuit that we have filed against the state. Are we in the lawsuit, and just forgive me, because I don't know about all the different lawsuits with all the different cities in the state.
Mhm.
Is this a class action lawsuit that we're all in together against the state?
Mm.
Would that give us more power?
Excellent question. I don't know that. Brian, you're better positioned to answer that.
They're all being heard by the same judge. They're separate cases, but the same judge is hearing it, which will provide some sort of consistency in terms of the arguments that the judge is hearing and eventually the rulings that the judge will make. So you won't be getting, if you go to different judges, these are all subjective determinations, so you
As
get.
long as you get a judge that,
Is this the
Yeah.
judge that said absurd? Is that the same judge that said this is absurd?
I don't know.
because here's the thing. If I had wanted to move to communities where I could have had easy transportation in and out of the city, I would have moved into one of the towns. I picked Duxbury because of the rural situation that I personally live in. So I feel like this is a little bit of strong arming from the state, trying to encourage urban sprawl. I totally support affordable housing I would love to have elderly people be able to afford to live here instead of having to sell their house because they can't afford the taxes that just went up 30%. But people select a town for certain reasons, and that is one. Then the other question I had, and what my biggest concern is about land swapping. Because I have heard on the North Shore that there has been a land swap situation. So that they could take conservation to build stuff like this and then swap it for marshland, which nobody was gonna be able to build on anyways, and call that the conservation land swap. So that terrifies me. Because we have protected conservation land in this town that I would hate to see us lose.
We're certainly not proposing that. In fact,
That's part of that.
Well, that's a good reason why we should do paper compliance, is to get us off the table. Let Duxbury move on to all the other things that we need to worry about. Let them fight with other communities. That's an excellent point, though. I don't even want to think about what the state will do in that case.
I hadn't even heard that, so, yeah.
Was it in Lynn?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
If we do paper compliance, does that allow us to drop out of the lawsuit?
It would, that would be a determination we have to make, because there are a couple of schools of thought on that. One is, if we pass the bylaw, then we can just get rid of the lawsuit, because there's nothing that we want to pursue at that point. Another school of thought is that we continue with the lawsuit, because merely passing the bylaw doesn't resolve the underlying challenge that we're making to the applicability of the law to Duxbury. So that would be a judgment we'd have to make, and certainly we'd look at the costs involved in long-term litigation, because that litigation takes years.
So then theoretically, if we prevailed in the litigation, would we be able to repeal the zoning?
Excellent question. You have an answer?
Yes, the answer there is yes, we would be able to do that. We would be able to cut, so if the law is invalidated, either through the legislature or the judicial process, we would be able to come back either in a special town meeting, or if the time lined up with a regular town meeting, and we would be able to repeal this particular zoning bylaw.
Is it easy to repeal as it is to pass?
It would be a heck of a lot easier to repeal it, I think, than it would be to pass it.
Let me ask you to vote wise.
Oh, vote. Oh,
50%?
yeah, very good question. Yes, so here's the thing. So in order to pass this, to bring it into force, the law was changed as a result of all of this. And when the municipality votes on this particular proposition, Duxbury votes on it, and all the others do too. It only has to pass by a majority vote. Now, if we were voting to, because, and the reason for that is because this is a proposition that would encourage the addition of new housing in a municipality. So that's why it's down to the simple majority versus the 2/3 majority. If we're going the other way, if we were going to revoke or rescind the bylaw, not a majority vote.
We need 2/3.
2/3. Yes, but I think this is me speculating, but based on what I'm hearing from the town, it would probably be pretty easy to get to 2/3 if they're gonna revoke it.
So my other concern about how unfunded this is, we've cited these districts on state roads, right? One is 53.
Yes.
The other is 3A, right at the intersection of 3. I live near 3 and 3A. I'm on Park Street, not far from a very dangerous intersection. And I'm very concerned about additional traffic, the lack of traffic mitigation, and this has been a problem for I think my whole life that I've lived in Duxbury, which I won't tell you how old I am, but yes. How, is there any way to tie traffic mitigation improvements to what they're asking us to do in terms of increasing the population in this area? State pays on
The state doesn't want to do it.
The state, right, has the money to do this, the state has the authority over these roads,
Have the
right?
authority to
Correct.
collect the money.
Yeah.
The sidewalk, Island Green County big wide, so that nobody gets hit by car.
Right, my neighbor Gail Cannon walks there like every day, you've probably all seen him on the road. We buy him reflective jackets that he won't wear. So, and there are kids in these neighborhoods, and the traffic is just very dangerous, right? And without sidewalks, I was on the sidewalk committee for years, I know this is difficult. But anyway, that's just another unfunded aspect of this that I'm really concerned about.
Yeah, I was gonna add another unfunded. We've not heard from the DPW what kinds of responsibilities they would have to service the unknown number of the 275 or 287. We don't know. The police department hasn't had a conversation about what are their expectations, given that there is a certain kind of character around Island Creek. We also don't know about the fire department as to what they would expect they would have to increase in terms of staffing, in terms of everything else that's required. And I think that's a very important component for those of us, I keep saying the same thing, for those of us that said no, and it goes, and we have no choice in the matter, what is the outcome 5 years from now? How is that going to help us? So I think those are sorts of things that I would expect on a balance sheet to be shown, that listen, even if it doesn't work for the way you want it, here's what you're gonna be out for. You and you and you and you and everybody who lives in this town, you're gonna be paying this much more. Now, do you want us to fight or do you want us to give it in? And that's kind of my approach to this.
Yeah, we don't have the fiscal impact study, you know, a fiscal impact study for this sort of thing. Because again, it's very difficult to know exactly what the impact would be.
Then you can't discuss it.
Well, we're all trying to get right.
Vote to something.
But we're starting to dive into municipal finance, and this is very challenging. First thing I want to say is, the question was asked earlier, and just reiterated again, what's the cost to the taxpayer of an additional incremental home? Right, somebody's gonna move into town, what does it cost us? And the answer is that it changes year to year. It's gonna be a different answer this year, it's gonna be a different answer next year. And the simple fact is that as a municipal government, our government is obligated to provide the services to our citizens. So in my view, the question, what does it cost if someone moves here? Is kind of orthogonal to the mission of the town. The mission of the town is to serve the residents. So the real question is, are we welcoming people here or not? Can we absorb more people or not? That's a personal judgment. I mean, I've lived here all of my life, and I gotta tell you that the summer times used to drive me crazy because of the influx and the traffic and the busyness, and that made me nuts, and I just couldn't wait for the people to go away in September. So, you know, I see the argument. I understand that wanting to push back against population pressure. I understand that. I feel it viscerally.
No.
But I've come around because I've been working with the Affordable Housing Trust. I know what a challenge this is for people.
I've lived here for 45 years. Every one of those years, my husband and I paid our taxes.
Yeah.
We put one child in through the school system here. And I still live in my home as an individual person.
Yeah.
And I'm paying almost $12,000 in taxes. So that is the reward that I get for living in this, I give to the town. So I want to make sure that if something like this happens while I'm still alive, I'd like to know next year and then the year after that, what am I going to be looking at from the town coming in with another 30% increase?
Sure.
Because we had to do what the state said. And frankly, I don't even think the state cares what Duxbury does. I think they're more interested in what's around Boston. That's what they really are.
Well,
But they have to include us and everybody else.
the public policy objective is to increase the housing supply.
It's a redistribution of wealth.
Well,
That's precisely-
that's an economic argument, if you go however you want to say it. They,
Yeah, that's.
yeah,
You said earlier tonight, it's supply and demand.
there's
The
that.
market will set
Yeah.
the price, right? We're seeing home prices right now, right? We're seeing a change in the housing market, right? What was flying off the market last year, at like $4 million, it's not flying off the market right now. So there's, there is some sort of a correction happening right now. So it's kind of interesting. So like, are we gonna just let the market figure out? Well, in the meantime, we have the state telling us that we have to do things. And so it's very clear that I don't like big government and whatever. I think everybody kind of knows that. So, have we gotten through your?
Yeah,
Well,
Brian was just paying me.
Yeah, I do want to make one point
Yeah,
about the municipal finance though, which is, and this was something that, I had explained to you recently, which I appreciated and I will share with you. Proposition 2.5 constrains the growth of budgets, as we know, 2.5% of the tax levy. And the levy is bigger than typically what we draw from it, so our taxes are actually lower than they could be most of the time. And the last time Duxbury passed an override was 1989.
I'm okay with that.
Many towns pass overrides every 5 or 6 years. The problem is that when our expenses grow faster than 2.5%, we're strangling our government. The government needs to have the money to operate. We've asked them to render these services. They're trying to render the services. They need more money. 2.5 puts a ceiling on it. So the only way to get around that, and this is the theory of growth, right? Is that if you increase your housing stock, then your tax levy will go up. Oh, well, now all of a sudden you have more revenue. So you,
That depends on what you increase it with.
well, I know, there's a whole bunch of soft stuff in there, but that's the growth mentality. So just to make the final point, it's gonna continue.
Spend it.
The mathematics, as I understood it, is that when the housing starts come in, the town generates revenue from permitting. The town generates a certain amount of revenue in the services supporting the construction. And the town immediately gets tax revenue as soon as the construction is finished. And then people move in, and then sometime later, our expenses go up to render services to the residents. So the revenue leads the expenses, and the expenses.
You expect, because building 260 apartments, if you build 260 single family homes, right now, they're each gonna pay 15, 18, 20 grand in taxes. Maybe come in with 2 kids, single family couple, that'll be net revenue to the town.
It was just reported that it's about $1,000 annually for each unit at Apple Creek.
They're not bringing in any revenue to the town, right, to add these 260 units.
Disproportionate to the emergency services that they require.
Oh, I'm dropping the budget.
Not even a month's rent, it's half of a month's rent in that area.
So,
Average is $2,400 a month
For the fair market.
for Island Creek. You look on the paper, that's what they're asking, $2,400 a month. Okay, so, but you're also dealing, you have to remember, the Keith family, you were dealing with a president who is a woman minority. So she gets a lot more tax breaks than other people.
Well, I think we'll continue.
Yes, yeah, so-
To some individual business.
So,
There's a lot around that.
I'll just stick to the rest of the, just the other. So, what's our plan for compliance? We've kind of already talked about this. Again, we're creating a zoning plan that complies with the act. In case the lawsuit fails. For zoning properties where development of new housing would be difficult or unlikely. We'd be maintaining eligibility for state money and avoiding the enforcement actions that we had talked about a little bit. Again, without creating new housing. But then if the law, and I touched on this too, if the law does become invalid, we could respond by repealing the bylaw at a future town meeting, to remove the overlay district. Gee, we gotta clean up a little bit. So what's next? Here are May 28th. We're doing this again next week on the 4th, right here, from 1 to 3. We already had the planning board hearing on May 12th, and then of course, June 16th. is a special town meeting when we're gonna vote on this. So, watch your phones, folks, snap the QR code. Yes, go ahead, I'll come right back to you, sir. Go ahead.
If we have to, you said you're gonna, send us this plan, if we have to fix it, and you said you might have to fix it or do some adjustments to it. Do you do that just by yourself, or do you come to the town again?
Good, very good, so there's kind of two parts to that. Excuse me, what we've done is, so we've, in terms of what we're gonna be putting before the town on June 16th. We've completed that part of it, so we've got a complete bylaw and we've got a complete zoning map. And what we've done, did it 3 weeks ago, almost a month ago, maybe? Yeah, it's been a while. We submitted that to, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, EOHLC. We submitted that to them, and they're doing what we refer to as a pre-review. So they're giving it basically a basic look at it and telling us if there's anything in particular that's problematic, that they would say, if you pass this and then submit it to us for a full compliance plan, we would say, no, you gotta fix this, this, and this. So we are expecting, we're not sure when, but we're expecting before town meeting, we will hear from the state with regard to that pre-review. If there's anything in our bylaw or on our map that's problematic, we would have, I don't know if we can change, I think we're locked in now with the bylaw. So we would have to formulate basically an amendment that we'd have to vote on at the floor of special town meeting to fix anything that the state says we need to fix. That's if they come back to us again with any issues that we need to
Could you
address.
also amend it if the injunction is granted by the judge on June 8th or prior or before town meeting? You could also amend this on the floor, correct?
Well, that would, if we,
You have a plan for that.
well, that would be on the purview, that's.
It sounds like we just have a plan to keep going forward
Yeah.
and make sure that the rezoning goes through. Well,
So, again, I think that would be, that would really be up to the, Brian, correct me, I think that would be up to the select board, if, if the judge rules in our favor on one or both of those two counts. It would really be up to,
because at that point,
select
the
board.
law's not enforceable.
I'm sorry,
At that point, the law's not enforceable.
well,
A
again,
public emergency
well, so, again, we're looking at two counts, right? One would be the unfunded mandate count, that theoretically would be fixable if the state would fund the unfunded mandate, so that's something that could be resolved, that the state could resolve with funding. Then the other count, of course, is the validity of the regulations. If the regulations are declared invalid, then, I think
So we would have a plan going forward on the town meeting if the
That-
judge did.
we would certainly be able to, make a motion to indefinitely postpone.
We have a
to
plan.
withdraw the article,
State doesn't
and other
accept
things.
what we submitted, but I'm asking, can we have a plan prior to town meeting? If the judge rules, in favor.
Other side of the equation.
Yeah,
I mean, we only have a plan to go forward. We don't have a plan to stop it in its tracks and then revisit it at a later date when we really have to. I mean, if he's buying us time by issuing.
if we were exempted from complying with the law, I would fully expect that there would be a motion on the floor of a special town meeting that would say, we would indefinitely postpone or, or revoke or rescind this particular amendment, yeah,
No, the town could just vote no.
or just vote no, yeah. And
So what
yeah.
happens if it gets voted no again? What happens next?
Well, it depends on what happens with the lawsuit.
So we don't hear anything on that.
But assuming we don't hear anything, okay, so, well, I mean, you kind of need a flow chart on this. Let's say you don't.
Real possibility.
It's certainly a possibility. So if we hear no on both counts, we're basically where we are right now. If we vote no, then we're not compliant. We would potentially lose eligibility for, the grants that we had talked about earlier. And we would be exposed to enforcement actions from the state.
When you say grants, is that this year's grants, next year's? What are you anticipating?
It would be any grants. Now, in some cases, I think in the case of Marshfield, they actually had a grant that they had applied for and was approved. And the state, and then when they were non-compliant, the state actually revoked a grant that had already been
Because
approved
they
for
didn't have a
them.
signed contract. So,
Sorry,
they didn't have a signed contract on the grant?
I don't know.
That's what I read, it's an unsigned.
Yeah, so it had not gotten to the point where it was irrevocable, so,
So I'm trying to decide how to vote.
yeah.
What would help me is, and, whether or not the state is gonna strong arm us, that's the other thing, there's lawsuits, I think they're off the equation. If the lawsuits go through, then we can undo all this. What would help me is if there was a ledger that said, if you vote yes, we've done this paper compliance to minimize development, so we've done that. If there was development, this is what it might look like, what it might cost, and then on the other side, if we vote no, this is what the state can do, so I can look at it and relate the two decisions, so when you do a sub, like, in essence, a ledger. Vote yes, this is what it looks like, vote no, and it's to the best of your ability, I understand. It's all probabilities and estimates, but that would help me make a decision of what am I putting at risk if I vote no or vote yes?
Same they did for the override, and then we give the presentation.
Well, yeah, with the override, it was a lot easier to do that, because the override was all numbers. And, this is not all numbers, this is, we've got numbers of acreage, we've got.
No, we need to
units,
get worst
but
case
we-
here,
we
we
can't-
should hear best case.
Again, that's not something we're equipped to do as a working.
So,
group.
Brian, when you're working on the budget for 2026, right, the 5A budget, are you doing it taking all of the grants out? How will that affect the 5A budget? Because I think it needs to be considered, because I think you guys must know how it's affecting us.
I don't know off the top of my head.
No, I know you don't, but I'm sure you don't, but I'm just hoping when they look at the budget for next year, which is already gonna be very beyond challenging, right?
Tyson, yeah.
So that's what I'm just curious, without the grant money, what it will look like.
It's a good point.
That's why I let you
And
know,
that's
there's so
what-
many issues that if we could just enumerate them, it might help me decide which way to go, because. We've gone through a lot of different issues tonight. I'm lost as to how they all balance out.
It's.
And you were not charged to do that, you were charged to say, this is the overlay, that's what the working group was charged to do, they weren't charged to.
No, I understand that,
And
it's
that's what-
helped me.
No,
And
yes.
that's what we're all asking, like, it's hard to make a decision without all of the information.
And I grasp that, and
Yeah.
the other thing to remember too is, that there's just so much that we really can't know. About, what the different consequences would be here.
I know
We can't, there are things that we just can't know, that are really big, that we can't know. So,
Again, Steve, are we at the point, like, where, people are asking you to show both sides? And it works against your goal to present any negatives to voting for this thing? I mean, is that really what your mission is, to get this thing to pass?
no, that's not true, that's not true. No,
I have-
it's not, no, Brian said it at the outset. With just about every other warrant article that you would have at town meeting, there's a proponent that puts forth that particular warrant article.
But I
This one doesn't have a proponent.
just
we are
don't
not-
see
we are not
any
proponents.
effort to represent the negatives, I don't see you,
Look, a lot of people have done a great job doing that.
and they're asking you to.
Yeah.
They're asking you to show both sides of it, and I've never heard this group, and I assume it's because this group wants passage. And I've watched videos and I've seen all this stuff, and I've always seen you guys focus on passage.
Yes.
And if that's, I don't have a problem with that. That's where you put your efforts, I don't have a problem you want to pass it, but just tell them, we're not about to
Yeah.
present negatives, we want this thing to pass.
This goes back to the charts that we were given as a working.
All right, so forget about the charge, but you guys do want it to pass. I've only heard arguments in that direction.
I want the town to do what the town wants to do. That's literally, and this is the plan, based on what we've heard from the town. The town has said, we want zero. We can't give you zero, but we can give you as close to zero as we possibly can. Because there's a lot that we need to comply with. This plan does that.
Yeah.
So that's what we were charged, so we were charged with coming up with a plan. And the message that we heard is what that plan should look like. That plan should look like as close to zero as possible, and that's what we've done here. So,
if we vote yes, does the lawsuit stop?
not necessarily, not necessarily, that would be up to the select board.
No. That is a complete yes or no
Who
question.
makes that decision?
Does the lawsuit stop?
Well, if nothing happens, no, the lawsuit would continue to proceed, but again,
If we say we vote yes, does the lawsuit stop?
once again, if nothing changes, it would continue, but again, that's up to the select board.
If we vote yes,
Mhm.
does the lawsuit end?
Which means we want to comply.
At the select board.
Not automatically. We would have to affirmatively pull the plug on the lawsuit. And that's a decision the select board would make with public input.
You have.
Because there are some people who say we wanna fight this even if we pass it. There are other people who say pass it and get rid of the lawsuit.
No, if I vote yes, I want the lawsuit to comply, so that we can let the courts decide whether Healy's right or wrong.
Okay,
That would be my
all right.
choice.
So to answer your question, it's not an automatic. There would have to be a decision.
And how does that happen?
Would that be another vote?
How the select.
We'd take it up at a select board meeting and we'd publicize it like any other matter.
But that wouldn't go to the people, that would just be the five of you voting for it.
Well, because you have.
Well, we don't vote in vacuum. We take public input into our decisions.
Yeah, sometimes.
The
select board lawsuit,
Say again?
was it the select board that initiated the
Yes.
lawsuit? So they would, the select board initiated the lawsuit, so they would be the guys that decide. They had to initiate it because we voted no. So they would be the ones that. Yes.
Isn't there another?
So what Brian's saying is, they would be the ones that decide if they continue with the lawsuit or not. And you would have to influence the select board if you wanted that to go one way or the other. Yeah, that's enough. I don't know.
Could you introduce an amendment to it at a special town meeting on the floor
To do what?
to?
Continue the lawsuit if we vote yeah.
Hmm.
You know.
I don't know the answer to that.
If nobody questions this and no court decides, then it's free reign, just like voting over 2.5. You tell me it's 2 3/4, maybe I'll vote for it. But you just tell me that 2.5's not enough and we need more money, and you can't tell me the percentage that you wanna go to, then you're never gonna get me to vote to go over 2.5. Okay, it's just not right. I mean, my boss doesn't hand me a blank check every week and go, hey, fill in the amount you want. I mean, I know you only work 3 days a week, but you know, hey, take 60. So that's the way it works. Honest to God, that's the best analogy I can give any of you here.
And does the MBTA group, once, if this does, whether it does or doesn't pass a town meeting, do you guys continue your agenda or your working as a group to monitor any development or any movement over there at the sites?
Our charge as a working group ends on June 30th of this year, so.
Countdown.
Do we know how much money those two properties pay in taxes?
That is a knowable number, and it's one that I don't know.
Okay.
Well, two numbers, I guess.
And is it by unit? Is it by person that lives there? How is that calculated? So if we had another, just using the numbers 260, 270, 240, 285, is that by apartment? How is that calculated? Because.
You'd have to talk to the assessor about that, but generally, usually the way this works is, they look at the owner is required to submit financial statements to the assessor. That talks about the income and the expenses, net operating income. And they use that to, come up with a value, assessed value for the property, fair market value. And then it would be based, so they use that information, that's part of the calculation that they use. But they would use that, to calculate what they, and then that would be the value of the overall property.
You don't know what they're paying now.
I don't know what they're paying right
Okay.
now. Now, the thing, let's just go back here. So the village, now there, actually, I was thinking, it's condos, no, the village is a cooperative. So that's owned by a corporation. So that's just one organization. So they would pay for taxes for the whole community, that they wouldn't be paying necessarily by the unit. So they would be, they would have a single, I believe they'd have a single tax bill as opposed to 160 tax bills.
So there's an assessed by unit.
Again, I talk to the assessor, I'm not sure how that's assessed.
So you can
But a
put the
multifamily
assessment
property.
map on the GIS and put in the address and find out.
Yeah,
I've got the database right there.
yeah, the information's out there, so,
Hmm,
yeah.
just saying.
So is Chestnut Street in the equation on the 40Bs as our total
Wait,
of having enough
space, you know, how many people, affordable housing.
Yeah.
Chestnut Street,
The
you know, the
SHR.
village on Chestnut Street,
Oh,
is that in the equation to our, how many places?
oh,
we
you
have
mean that the housing
in
authority,
our-
Yeah.
the housing authority units? Yeah, those are included in the SHI, yes. Yep. Yes, go ahead.
I was just, we all don't like the law, the Massachusetts law. Is anybody in the town, the town manager or the select board working with, Representative Swayze to, cause he's got 3 bills, I think, working against it. Do you do anything with him or have?
I talk to him all the time.
Hmm?
Yeah, I talk to him all the time.
So you have input with him then?
Sure, yeah.
And then it's up to the rest of us to be writing a letter to him, telling him, we don't like the.
Our state rep has been very supportive of the town's position. He's been one of the vocal forces up there. And that's, as Steve and Tag mentioned, one of the avenues we're looking at is legislative.
Right.
Who knows where that's gonna end up, but we certainly have an advocate for us up there.
That's what, if we do this, if we vote for this plan and we're in compliance, I don't want us to get lazy as a town. Trying to keep fighting the law.
Duxbury never gets lazy. On things like this especially. Don't fear that. More questions, folks, please. Yes, go ahead.
I would just say that it's things like, I've seen in multiple places in presentations, for $1 to $2 million in grants. But if you go to the town website and you pull the grant list and you add up the unsigned grants, the total's roughly $491,000. So
$491,000?
yes,
In
unsigned grants.
So- the numbers that we put up, well, now,
So that's why I was asking you, are you talking about this year, you talking about next year, which
so the
grants?
numbers that you saw here, those were those were grants that we've actually received, so those are real numbers. I'm sorry?
Adequate or
Uh,
1 million a year, 2 million a year?
yeah, so that was over the period, we looked at 24 months, we looked at 22, at 23, 24 and 23. No, it's 23 and 22, I think, that was when we had the information. So anyway, over 24 months, the numbers that you saw up here were, you know, based on the trailing 24 months.
So that's over a 2-year.
2-year period, yeah.
So really 1 million. If you're saying 2, divide that in half.
I mean, yes, but again,
Your numbers actually matter when people are
It's not
looking at.
losing 1 million versus 2 million.
Hmm.
So if you want us to, to not lose the $1 million, that's one number that people may not stomach losing $2 million grants. But when you say townwide, vote no, and you lose a $1 million grant, there may be people that say, fine, I'll lose the $1 million grant, pay me on property taxes.
well, once again, let's not lose sight of the big picture. Grants are one part of the picture. There's a lot more to it
That's
than
what
that.
you're pointing out to.
Yes, but, well, I mean, question was part of that, so I was addressing that. But again, it's part of a much bigger picture, a much bigger picture of enforcement.
Sticks.
Well, I mentioned them earlier, you know, if we're non-compliant, then again, the state could come in and they could file suit against the town. And they could require us, you know, get a court order for the town to comply with the law, either passing what we're showing here or another plan. Now, and if we continue to say no, it's possible that the state could come back. We're talking about possibilities here. The state could impose their own bylaw and they could impose their own districts, not the ones we're looking at here. They could pick other ones that are, you know, greenfield, much more likely possibly to be developed than what we're showing here. And we wouldn't have control over that.
You can't do it while we're on court.
Well, you know, once again,
You can't do it
well, once again, it depends what's gonna happen with the, you know, in court. But if we get into a non-compliant status, you know, without a, you know, if we're not successful in the lawsuit, that's the exposure that we have. And again, that's something that we cannot quantify that. We don't know what they would do. There's no way we can put numbers on what we don't know that they'll do. So,
To this gentleman's question, you're asking us to trust this cloud.
Yeah, all the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
No,
Well, I think it's really, to me, it comes down to, do you want to go forward with the minimal impact plan that you have control over putting forward? Or do you want to risk the state saying, okay, you tell us to pound sand, here's what we're gonna do? That's really what it comes down to.
that's the way that Steve, I had not expressed it that way, but the way that you put it is really important. You know, if we're, if we do this,
Are getting this through, so the state might say these paper plans are no longer valid. For now, they're being accepted, so I'm assuming that, that's a whole nother question. I'm assuming that if we do paper compliance, we're good for now. It could all change, who knows? But that's what I'm weighing is paper compliance that we control, or the state coming and going, fine, you're gonna tell us to pound sand? Here's what we're gonna do.
and we have no control in that situation.
Right.
That's exactly the question.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. You put your finger right on it.
I'm embarrassed I didn't mention that earlier. Thank you very much for putting it in those terms. Thank you. Other questions and comments? This is what Duxbury is about, folks. You folks coming in here and talking to us about this, giving us your opinions, giving us your views, asking your questions, that's what we need to hear. That's what got us to this point, coming up with this plan. We heard you when you talked to us, talked to us, shouted to us last November. And we dramatically changed the plan to come up with this instead of what we had last time. Because of you. You talked to us. You gave us that feedback. We acted on it.
Will this
This
change
is,
for the next meeting? Have you taken anything that we've said today that would impress you to change something that you've presented to us in these slides for the next meeting? Some of us may want to come for the next meeting because there may be some new things that we learn. Is there anything else?
well, the bylaw and the maps, they are already in the warrant. So the warrant is now, I think the warrant is now closed. Yeah, so the warrant's closed. So what we're presenting to you here is what you're gonna be voting on June 16th. So
Steve, you said that they're sort of doing a look-see. Is that?
they're doing a pre-review of the map and the bylaw that you're gonna be voting on. Now, and they may come back to us and they may say, well, we don't like this, we don't like that, you're gonna have to change that. If you submit this to us, you're gonna need to change that in order for us to approve it. So at this point, if they come back to us with that feedback, then we would have to take a look at that as the working group, we would certainly be doing this. What would we need to have put forth? And John, here's where it comes into your neighborhood. So we would need to think about an amendment that we would need to propose along with this amendment.
What is
amending the
the
amendment.
date? So we have, I know you said there's a meeting on the 4th, next week.
Yes,
And then what day is the paper look-see coming back for us?
wish I knew. I don't know.
Okay.
No, that's the date that we expect that we'd be getting feedback on the lawsuit. That's completely separate from what I'm talking about here. The pre-review that the state is doing for us is separate, and they haven't given us a time.
Projection,
I'm sorry?
no projection or anticipated turnaround?
No, unfortunately, no.
But if I could just add to
Yes,
that,
go ahead.
the letter we got the 11th hour last time,
Yeah.
even though it was a complicating factor, obviously. At the end of the day, there wasn't a whole lot in there that the state had by way of comments. So the fact that we've gone through this all the way again, my expectation is there'll be few, if any, comments this time around from the state.
So basically, they don't say anything and just leave it open for some other time.
No, my point being is that we've been compliant with all the regulations as we went through and put together the map and the bylaw. So when we say comments back from the state, it's technical issue saying, well, you need to adjust this line or whatever. My expectation is that there'll be none, given that there were only a few last time.
Okay.
But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I could be proven wrong, but I'm expecting none. So it should be smooth sailing from the state, I would expect, in terms of compliance if we pass it. I don't expect them to come back and say, no, all these things are wrong and you have to do it over. We'd know that by now.
Do we have one of the towns?
Oh, this gentleman has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so if you were to take the village at 20, that there.
Yeah.
So does that mean that excess land goes to market that somebody else would develop, or it's them because it's their land?
Like you said, excess land, what were you referring to?
Well, if you look at the 20.
20.65.
You see the green, you see the green like that?
Oh, yeah.
I'm guessing that's where you would develop. I don't know what it is that's there. Okay, but would it be them to do the development, or does that make that other land accessible to, is it like broken off that another company can come in and develop it?
Good, all of what you see here on the left that's bounded by the yellow, the village owns all of that,
So it
so
would be up to the village to do the building.
to do any building, yeah.
Okay.
That's all, open, it's somebody else, the town's not gonna build houses.
No, I know the house, I knew the town wasn't, it was whether another entity
Is it
could
because
come in and do it.
who owns the surrounding property around the building?
Wait,
Oh,
can I, hold on, at Jeff's point,
Is that part of the old farm, or is that?
let me finish answering his question. That green space counts towards the entire area. So in other words, the density we were talking about at, was it 12?
12, yeah.
12 is for that whole, everything inside those yellow lines. So if, on the left, so if any of that green were to be developed, it will be taken away from units that are already developed. So they'd have to get rid of units over there to put units in the green space. In other words, that whole area can't be more dense than it is already. Does that make sense?
My question was more of that if, okay, whoever is in control of that land,
Yeah.
another entity couldn't come in and redo it and kind of take it and do what they want to do. So it's.
Unless the village sold it. Unless the village sold it.
Yes, okay.
Right, but in any event, that whole area, the net number of units,
Yeah,
regardless of where they are inside that yellow, can't be more dense than that development is already.
12 units per acre.
Exactly, yeah.
Why,
So regardless of who owns it.
why
So-
are we capping that side at 12 and this side at 19?
Yeah, yeah, so we touched on that a little bit earlier.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we had to get to a minimum average density across any areas that we would overlay here
Right.
of 15. And so the reason why we did 12 on the village was because that's basically the density that's there right now.
But why cap it on that side? I mean, so if you don't think the village is going to expand,
Mhm.
then why not say, oh, village, you can go up to 19?
Mhm.
And then go back to Island Creek and say, Island Creek, you know, whatever the density already is, we're gonna keep you at 14 or whatever, and then you still have your average. And there is no expansion
Well,
possibility.
Okay, so the thing there is, remember, both of these have to add up to 50.
Right.
Right? We are at 50.1. I mean, that's tighter than well, it's tight. And one of them has to be at least 50% of the total area that's zoned. So, one of them has to be bigger than the other,
Okay.
basically, or they have to be exactly equal. Now, but the thing is, if we wanted to put a lower density here on Island Creek, so that'd be a lower density on 29 and a half acres. And we'd be having to put a higher density here on the smaller property. That raises the possibility that you could have development on both of these sites. Putting it the density of 12 here basically takes this one entirely off the map and just restricts any possibility of, net new unit addition to one of the sites instead of having it on both.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Why are we, it seems so lopsided, right? Like, okay, my concern is traffic.
Yeah.
So if all of the potential new housing is on Tremont Street, even though we know, because we live on the ground, and this is only paper compliance, we know on the ground that Village of Duxbury is not gonna grow, but why not give them, oh, you guys can go up to 20 units per acre, like, go ahead and build a skyrise, and we know it's not gonna happen. Isn't that more paper compliance that would ensure less development at the Island Creek site?
Can you speak to this?
Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
I'll just give you the straight answer.
We're on a 7-minute count.
No, so very, very quickly, in working with the consultant, we bounded the parcels, right? So we started with that, and then we had an actual table with the density on each side. And how does it work out? So you can imagine what it looked like, a seesaw, right? Low here and high there, and then it goes the other way. And the combination of 12 and 19, it just jumped out as the most obvious, because as Steve was pointing out, with the change in the larger area on the right and the smaller area on the left, if you try and balance it differently, it gets out of whack very quickly. So you can't actually reduce the density at Island Creek sufficiently to constrain it to where it is without going to like 30 at the village. It seems like it would work, but it didn't work. The numbers didn't work out because of the difference in the areas, about 30 over here and about 20 over there. So
I wish we could see those numbers.
Maybe we should share them. I think it would be very instructive, man.
We might take one more question, go ahead.
Now, the height restriction on the building, is that something the state could change or that is,
That's in our bylaw, so
that could never change?
unless we decide to change it, yes.
What is the height?
It's 4 stories on the, at Island Creek
3.5,
and,
3.5.
sorry, thank you. It was 4 originally, yes, but we went to 3, so 3.5 stories on, at Island Creek. And I think it's also 3.5 at the village.
And what's the current at Island Creek?
So at Island Creek right now, I think there's some that are 2, I think there are some that are 3. And this one back here, way back here, that, I think that's the newest building up there. That one is 4, yep.
The B buildings are 3 and the A building's 4, and anything pre-existing is 2.
2, right, yeah.
So is that 4 or is that 3.5?
That's.
They used the half off the B buildings to make it 4.
Let's see, that's what you do.
Okay, like I said, so.
I mean, I look at it and I count 4, and they just said it was 3.5, and what this is.
That's the zoning that we're permitting.
Your town zoning holds up against this?
Well, once again, they were built by a special.
No, that,
right?
when they wanna build, when they wanna tear something down and build another one, our town zoning is gonna stop it from being higher than.
4.
3.5 is what they can do under this, if they were to develop something under this bylaw.
Because that's a
Tear down the
zone?
two.
I don't understand.
Tear down the 2.
Yeah, so this is the overlay that we're putting over there, and the bylaw that goes with it restricts them. Any new development that they do there would be restricted to a height of 3.5 stories.
So the state allows you to add a restriction there?
Yes, to specify height. Yep, they do allow us to do that. All right, well, they're gonna be coming in with the hook shortly, so thank you, everybody, so much for coming in, we appreciate it. Please give it, here we go, get your phones out, I want this to be on everyone's phone, get your phone. We got a lot of information out there, so please take that. And we'd love to see you on the 4th, so please come.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. This guy right here.
Don't do that, don't worry. Regarding the 4th, I'm actually.
I think we need to.
Oh, okay.
Shut that better off.
Yep.
I think.
Sorry for the part of at the very end there, I was just like. And Michelle has to.
Sure.
Good stuff.
Thank you, yes.
Thanks, Ross.
Oh.
I'm gonna be celebrating through you.
Yes, but you're not.
Whichever way it goes.